Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Waypoint podcast, where we give you Torah insights from the weekly Parsha. This week is Tetzaveh, a fascinating piece if you know what to look for, but again, this is one of those that seems a little bit monotonous because we are still involved in being told about the construction of the temple and several of other aspects of temple service. So this week, we're predominantly told about the construction of the menorah and of the priestly garments that makes up a large portion of this week's Torah portion, but also the incense altar and the holy place, a number of other utensils that are used in the temple. But again, the primary beef of it is going to be the priestly garments. And my colleague has prepared a wonderful lesson for us in light of that. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it over to him. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Waypoint podcast, Parasha Tetzaveh. And so this is once again another one of those Torah portions that seem kind of boring. I know it's going to seem that way, and I'm going to stress that it's only seeming that way. Honestly, when I was reading through this Torah portion in preparation, it was really hard for me to pick any single subject to talk about for this week's episode because we get a lot of interesting and intricate details, all of which are incredibly important in this week's Torah portion. But I did not have the time to simply select one. In fact, this is one of the larger Torah portions for which there are commentaries on because of this very reason. There's so much here. So I decided actually to kind of focus a little bit on the beginning and on the end. And hopefully that's going to make sense here in a second. So the very first couple of words in this week's Torah portion is Ve'ata Tetzaveh, which is, and you shall command. Speaking, of course, to Moses. And he says, and you shall command the sons of Israel. What's interesting is this is different from the way the Torah usually formulates a commandment, believe it or not. There are tons of times in which commandments are referred to as commandments. Tzav, it's where we get the word mitzvot. Mitzvot is just plural, mitzvah. Tzaveh is the root word for commandment. And so tetzaveh, and you shall command. It's different in that you don't usually see that. So usually you see, and Hashem spoke to Moses saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them. And that's usually the formula that you see when it comes to any kind of commandment or something coming from Hashem. But instead we see Tetzaveh. It's very different. But also, and it's no coincidence that this formula for this particular opening phrase is also different for the rest of the commandments for the rest of this Torah portion. We immediately read about the menorah in the very first verse of this Torah portion. What's interesting is the whole rest of this Torah portion is all about the priestly service and the tabernacle, and eventually the temple, of course. And so all of these, in fact, most of these, if not all of these, are really commandments given specifically and only for the Kohanim, the priests, and the sons of Aaron and the high priest. Now, the very first verse in this Torah portion says, and you shall command the sons of Israel. And it talks about the lighting of the menorah lamp. This is interesting in that it does not say you shall command Aaron and his sons or the Kohanim to tend to the oil lamp. And that's very different. And it's interesting in that it's implied, right? So the menorah would have been placed in the holy place. It would be the light source for the inside of the tabernacle, the holy place, not the Holy of Holies, the holy place, the main room inside the tabernacle. And So by virtue of the fact that it's located there, only the priests could actually go into the holy place and tend to the menorah lamp. But it's still, the commandment reads that the sons of Israel shall see to this particular commandment, which actually means that this commandment applies to all Jews, all sons of Israel, all the people involved in the covenant here, which is very interesting because they can't. So even though it's incumbent upon them, it's implied that there's nothing that they can really do. But now, of course, historically, we know that what this does mean too is that any Israelite can make olive oil for the menorah. Any Israelite, he can go and help provide olive oil to tend to the lamp itself, even though they themselves cannot go in there. But they play a part. All of Israel can come together and on an individual basis or as a community and help to make oil for the menorah, so that it would be lit inside the temple or in the tabernacle. Now, you'll remember at the beginning, I said I wanted to actually focus on the fact that it follows a different formula. So now we have two different things that are different. What does this teach us? And how is this like, when I said at the beginning is like the end? How is that connected here to the end of our Torah portion? So Tzav shares the same root for the word to connect in Hebrew. So the verse could also read, believe it or not, and you shall connect the sons of Israel, and talk about the menorah from there, and the crushing the oil and everything else. So there's actually a strong connection with the word tzaveh and tzav for connect and commandment, right? So the commandments are in and of themselves a way to connect with God. And I think that explanation is fairly self-evident. But even though the menorah is placed in a way that the common Israelite can't get to it, it's actually still incumbent upon him to, in his personal life, connect with God by bringing light into the world through commandments. And that's all just from the first verse here. So what's that at the end of this? So I would like to offer this explanation that the tabernacle details and all of its temple offerings, utensils, and everything, they all play a part in how we are meant to understand our prayer lives. They are a shadow of the things in the heavenly realm. And so this is all a way of connecting. And this is not me thinking this. This is actually ancient Jewish thoughts. That's why the 3 daily prayers usually do line up with the 3 daily offerings. The lighting of the menorah lined up also in conjunction with the daily offerings. The twice daily offerings, specifically the tamid, the continual burnt offerings. And so the menorah was tended to twice a day at least, and always in conjunction with the tamid offerings. And we're told that we're responsible for bringing light into the temple as a people. And so the service that you can provide, you might not be a priest, but we also learn in this Torah portion that the intention was to be a nation of priests. And so through the service of the heart, which is prayer, you are essentially turning your personal bubble and your space, your body, into a temple for which you do service. When you step into prayer, you are being a light into the world. You are connecting with God through a mitzvah. You are offering up prayers, and prayers are received in conjunction with the offerings in order to coincide with this idea that we are a nation of priests. The priests have their special job, but everyone also is expected to live this job in their daily lives. So there's an interesting little thing I wanted to read here from the Rebbe in Likutei Sichot. So I'll just read it to you here, and then I'll tell you what it reminded me of. But so we learn about you must make an altar for burning incense. This is the incense altar. This is towards the very end of the Torah portion. Now, one reason why the passage about the inner altar, the incense altar, is placed at the very end of all the discussions pertaining to the tabernacle and all that was in it is in order to indicate that the inner altar has a unique status above and beyond all of the other furnishings of the tabernacle. What was different about this inner altar? was that every other ritual was performed in the tabernacle had spectators. When the incense was burned on the in their altar, however, there was no one present, only the priest burning it and God himself. Furthermore, we are taught that it was specifically this private service that caused the divine presence to be the most felt in the tabernacle. This lesson of the incense is very relevant in our modern and loud world, the ultimate in holy living, and especially in areas of kindness and charity, is when no one is present, when we exhibit generosity without publicity purely because it is the right thing to do. And so that's the end of that little part that I wanted to read. But your prayers are offered up as incense. That connection is with Psalm 141, verse 2. May my prayer be counted as incense before you. So even though you cannot be in the room yourself offering these incense, your hope is that your prayer would be as though it were like you were being in the temple and offering these incense. And so this is a private event. This is actually primarily why, even when you're praying in a group of 10 people, when you say the Amidah, the Shemona Esrei, the primary focus of any prayer service, you do it quietly and only loud enough so that you can hear yourself talk, but nobody else can hear you talk, because that's when you step into the temple service and offer up your incense with just you and God. And that is your daily service. That is you turning your body into a holy and living offering. If that reminds you of Romans 12, it should. That's where I'm going with this. And so there's a strong correlation here with everything that's going on in the temple. There's a lot of detail. I know it can be easy to overlook these details. And I'm encouraging you not to, because I'm telling you, all of these details actually have a way of connecting you to God in some way, with prayer, with service, or there's a lot of messianic implications, especially when it comes to the job of the high priest. A little hint: if you read about his job in Hebrew, you'll see a lot of messianic implications. But that being said, it was just a short message for you today. I just wanted to remind you that we are called to be a holy people and to live our lives in the daily world as though we are like priests of our own sanctuary, of our own body and our own space in our bubble. And our job is to bring heaven down here as a shadow of the things to come. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And so that's it's a duty. And I think 3 daily prayers, even if you might think that be a monotonous thing, this is a sacred duty of yours, and it should be taken fairly seriously and reverently. You're not encouraged to sit there and just pray and then be done with it and can't wait to get back to doing what you're supposed to do. It is a holy and reverent service, and it's meant to coincide with the priestly service as a shadow or a mirror of the heavenly things, and to hopefully bring heaven closer and closer, one commandment at a time, one mitzvah at a time, one good act at a time, one good act of private charity, generosity, integrity, and just silent obedience and duty to the Lord our God, in holy reverence. So that's all I really had for you today. Again, I really encourage you to look up some commentaries on this particular Torah portion. There's a lot here. I actually would recommend Or HaChaim specifically, but be prepared to read a lot if you want to do that one. But that's all I have for you today. I hope that this has spoken to you in some way or meant something, or maybe you just simply learned something about the tabernacle you didn't know before. Either way, I hope it's blessed you in some way, and hopefully we will see you next week for next episode. So until next time, shalom.
Welcome back, and thank you, Seamus, for that incredible lesson. That's one of the things that is more difficult, and many may find it more difficult about particularly these aspects of the Torah, where you get these long, lengthy, detailed descriptions of the instruments of the temple and the construction of the temple, and the dimensions of the temple. And a lot of times it seems like it's difficult to derive some spiritual meaning from that, but as Seamus has shown us, that's not the case. There is oftentimes much more spiritual enlightenment to be found than the simple face value description of these elements. For today's Haftarah connection, this was a difficult one for me, and that is because this week is a Shabbat Zachor, right? So, most of you, if you look on the Chabad website, or those of you who are following First Fruits of Zion, you probably saw that 1 Samuel 15 was the Haftarah for this week. And that is particularly because this is the week that is preceding Purim. But ordinarily, if that weren't the case, the Haftarah for this week would have been Ezekiel 43, where we're beginning a description of the heavenly temple, and that might have been a much easier connection to make to this week's Torah portion. Nonetheless, I did follow along with Chabad and First Fruits of Zion. And so I focused mainly on 1 Samuel 15. And as much as it was difficult to find a connection to this week's Parsha, it also seems like it was staring me right in the face. So bear with me, but this week's Parsha, as I said, a great portion of it is going into detail on the priestly garments. Matter of fact, the first 3 verses outline that it's going to be describing the priestly garments. The first 3 verses of chapter 28 is where Israelite is commissioned to build the priestly garments and fashion those for the priests, and especially the high priest. And a lot of detail and a lot of care goes into this. And for the sake of where I'm going, I'll include also Leviticus 21:10, because this is the command where the high priest is forbidden from tearing his own garment, and that's going to become relevant. Because what jumped out at me is, in particular, 1 Samuel 15, 27, and 28. All right. Many of us are familiar with this story. This is where King Saul is commanded to go and make war on the Amalekites and annihilate them completely, like utterly destroy them. No one left alive. But he doesn't do this. He saves the king alive, and he saves the best of the Amalekites' flocks. And he's going to use these as sacrifices for Hashem. At least that's what he tells Samuel. Samuel is obviously very disappointed that he hasn't actually done what Hashem commanded him to do. And so Samuel tells him that Hashem is pretty much done with him at this point. He's had his chance at being king. He failed to do the job correctly, and he bowed to the whims of the people and did not stand up boldly as a king should to lead the people rather than simply doing as the people would will. And then Samuel goes to leave, and not wanting to concede the news, not wanting to simply accept the bad news that he'd been given and live with that, he reached out and grabbed Samuel's robe, this same high priestly robe that we have seen the description of here in this week's Parsha, and he tears it. Right, it tears as a result of him grabbing it as Samuel is leaving. My takeaway from this, just kind of trying to work in the same headspace as King Saul here. And there's a lot of self-reflection that we could all gain from this, but ultimately it seems as though Saul in this act is trying to impose his own rebellion or his own wrongdoing onto Samuel. And by that I mean, so the high priest is forbidden from tearing his garment. Now, Samuel didn't tear this garment. Saul tore this garment. But anybody who saw Samuel afterwards that didn't witness this happen might have assumed that Samuel did this. Now, that's a bit of conjecture, and I'll concede that it's conjecture. But all the same, the lesson that I derive from this, particularly from Saul and his actions, is that tends to be what we do when a brother or sister reaches out to us to maybe enlighten us or reveal to us some wrongdoing that we have. our first instinct is typically to impose that same wrongdoing on them, kind of illustrate to them that they have no right to point the finger. And that's not okay, right? That's pride talking, and one of the better things to do that really Saul could have done here is accept it, and really pay attention to the detail of where we need to make corrections. Uh, how much easier, and this is a question that really jumped out at me, how much easier might Saul's life have been if he had just accepted this judgment, stepped aside, and let Samuel anoint a new king? How much easier would his life have been? He may have even retained a high position of authority under the new King David. He may not have expired or died as early as he did, because really this is the beginning of his rebellion. It doesn't stop here. It just continues and gradually gets worse until the point where he ultimately does die because of it. So the takeaway here is really when Hashem is telling us something that we don't want to hear, be it through another individual or just through life circumstances, rather than finding a way to point a finger at someone else or impose our wrongdoing on someone else, really this is the time to listen the most intently and pay attention to the details. Because typically how we got here was not paying attention to the details. It's exactly how Saul got here, was not paying attention to the details and not carrying out the details of what he was commanded to do. So that's my takeaway from this week and this week's Haftarah Connection. Let's take that into the week with us. I hope you enjoyed this week's Waypoint. If you'd like to see more content like this, hit that like and subscribe button. Please ring that bell, and also maybe subscribe to the Patreon, or also seek membership on the website, alternatemedia.com. Thank you very much.
Special thanks to this month's Patreon supporters.